Let me set the scene. I live in a tiny, rural village with barely 10 or 15 houses. It's quiet, secluded, and surrounded by nature. Just a 5-minute drive from the highway and about 10 minutes from town. Across the street from my house, there's a forest, reachable with a short 10-minute walk. It was the first day of Christmas. My partner and I, feeling uncomfortably full from all the festive feasting, decided a walk might help. By the time we stepped out, it was already dark, around 5 p.m. We took along a bright LED flashlight and my camera with a flash, as I love capturing nighttime shots of nature. We headed out down a narrow country road toward the forest, planning to turn onto a gravel cycling path that skirts the forest's edge. This path connects our village to the next, roughly a 15-20 minute walk apart. In the middle, though, you pass through a small stretch of dense, dark forest where the towering trees seem to press in on you. As we entered that section, the flashlight beam bounced off something reflective up ahead. It was a car. That alone was strange. Vehicles aren't allowed on this path, and it's so narrow and hidden that it's nearly impossible to drive here unnoticed. My partner shone the light into the car. It appeared empty, and the windows were frosted over. The car must have been sitting there for hours. Odd, but maybe someone had abandoned it, I thought. Nearby, a tree with an unusual shape caught my eye. I asked my partner to aim the flashlight at it so I could snap a few shots with my camera flash. As I crouched down to frame the photo, my partner's voice broke the silence, low and uneasy. There's someone standing behind us, in the middle of the road. My stomach dropped. I'd been glancing around behind us during the walk, half expecting to spot a wild boar. It was mating season, and they can get aggressive. But this wasn't a boar. I turned to look, and sure enough, a man stood there, just beyond the edge of the flashlight's beam. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just staring. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was startled to see us taking photos near his car. It wasn't even legal to park there after all. So, keeping my voice calm, I stood up and called out to him, explaining I was just photographing the tree. Nothing. He didn't react. He just kept standing there, staring at us. Trying to shake the growing unease, I asked if he needed some light to see. His response was unnervingly flat. That's not necessary. By now, the air felt heavy with something unexplainable. We didn't wait to see what he'd do next. Exchanging a quick look, my partner and I decided, without a word, to get out of there. We turned and walked briskly toward the next village, our hearts pounding. The road stretched on, but we knew it was only 5, maybe 7 minutes until we'd reach safety. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following us. Once we reached the first streetlight in the next village, my nerves began to settle, just a little. But when we turned to glance back, the uneasy feeling returned in full force. The car we had seen earlier was moving. Slowly, it crept out of the forest, paused as if deciding, and then it turned around and disappeared back into the shadows. The headlights switched off, and it was as if the car had melted back into the darkness. He was still in there, still in the forest. I couldn't shake the strangeness of it all. The frozen windows, his bizarre behavior. And then, something clicked. I had caught the letters on his license plate, though not the numbers. When we finally got home, I Googled the plate to see where the car was from. My stomach sank. It was registered to a city 6 hours away from our village, And here's the kicker. My country is under an extremely strict lockdown right now. Travel, especially that far, is prohibited unless for urgent, unavoidable reasons. What on earth was he doing there? On the way home, we'd taken an alternate, much longer route to avoid going back through the forest. Our flashlight battery died halfway, leaving us stumbling in near darkness. My phone was hanging on at just a sliver of charge, so I didn't want to risk using it until we were safely home. Looking back, I regret not calling the police immediately, but in the moment, my mind was racing. When we finally made it back, I didn't waste time. I called the authorities and gave them every detail I could remember, though I cursed myself for not catching the full license plate. It didn't seem so alarming at the time. I was still piecing it all together. But then it hit me. Those frosted windows. There's no way he could have been walking behind us. The frozen car had clearly been sitting there for hours. Yet somehow, he had managed to sneak up on us. Soundless, lightless, and with that unnerving silence. The realization chilled me. The man wasn't just lingering or watching us. He had been sneaking up on us while I was focused on my camera. And the thought of what might have happened if I'd been there alone, I don't even want to imagine. Looking back now, I can't help but feel incredibly lucky. Lucky to have my partner with me. Lucky to have the bright flashlight. Lucky that nothing worse happened. Because in that forest, in that moment, things could have gone very differently. This happened a few years back when I was still in high school. I was 17 at the time, living in a bigger city after my mom, little sister, and I had moved there from a small town. It was a big adjustment, but by then, I'd gotten used to it. Sort of. That night, I was home alone with my 3-year-old sister. My mom often worked night shifts, which meant I was the built-in babysitter. It was Christmas, so by 5 p.m., it was pitch black outside. The night was quiet, at first. Around 9 p.m., my sister and I were cuddled on the couch. I'd let her stay up late with me, as it made bedtime a lot easier. Once she dozed off, I'd carry her to her room and tuck her in. No tantrums, no fuss. But that night, just as her little head was resting on my shoulder, Matilda, our basset hound, went absolutely ballistic. Now, Matilda was the kind of dog who was sweet to a fault. Barking wasn't her style, let alone growling. Yet here she was, growling low and deep, her floppy ears perked, the fur on her back standing up like bristles. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong. My instincts kicked in. I picked up my sister, who was groggy but quiet, and brought her to the bathroom, the one room in the house with no windows. I set her in the bathtub, told her to stay put and not move a muscle, then locked the door from the inside. I didn't want to scare her, but my voice was shaky, and she could tell something wasn't right. Leaving her safe in the bathroom, I rushed back to the living room to grab my phone. My hands were trembling as I reached for it, preparing to call for help. That's when it started. The banging. Loud, frantic banging on the front door, like whoever was on the other side was desperate to get in. My heart leapt into my throat. I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. My breath caught in my chest. There was a man standing there. His face was smeared with blood. Matilda went wild, barking and growling, trying to wedge herself between me and the door. My stomach twisted into knots. I couldn't think, couldn't move. The man kept pounding on the door, louder and louder. Then I heard it. Voices. Someone shouting. He started pleading, his voice raw and desperate. "Please, let me in!" I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes from the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I couldn't stay frozen forever. I leaned toward the peephole again, heart racing. That's when I saw him. A second man. He was pounding on the bloody guy, fists flying, while the first man kept pleading, voice cracking as he begged me to open the door. I was a defenseless 17-year-old girl, with nothing but a locked door and a growling dog between me and two men, one of them covered in blood, the other violently attacking him right outside. My mind screamed at me to do something, but what? My hands were trembling so hard, I almost dropped my phone as I finally dialed 911. My voice came out shaky and broken as I explained the situation. I must have been rambling, barely coherent. Honestly, I don't even know how the dispatcher figured out my address, but somehow they did. They reassured me help was on the way. Police, fire, and ambulance. The banging continued, mixed with shouting and scuffling from the two men outside. It felt like forever, but eventually, the noise stopped. Moments later, a police officer knocked on my door. I barely managed to unlock it, the adrenaline making my fingers fumble. What I learned left me reeling. The bloody guy had been jumped a couple of blocks away and severely beaten. He'd managed to escape and run to my house, but his attacker had chased him down, catching up just as he got to my door. Meanwhile, inside the house, chaos reigned. Matilda was still barking and growling like mad. My little sister was screaming and crying, still locked in the bathroom where I'd left her. And me? I was a mess. The adrenaline coursing through me was making my whole body tremble, and I could feel tears building in my eyes, even though I was desperately trying to keep it together. When I opened the door, part of it was smeared with blood, where the hurt guy had been pounding, and that sight was enough to push me over the edge. I broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as everything hit me at once. The officers, calm and composed, gently helped me get Matilda to settle down enough for them to come inside. They retrieved my sister from the bathroom, her tiny face red and streaked with tears, and did their best to soothe us both. One of them called my mom at work to explain what had happened, while another sat with me to take my statement. When my mom finally got home, we all clung to each other, shaken but grateful the ordeal was over. That night, none of us slept in our own rooms. My mom, my sister, and I all crammed into her bed, seeking comfort and safety in the closest thing we had, each other. Looking back now, I realized the bloody man wasn't trying to hurt us. He was terrified, desperate for help, and doing what anyone in his position would have done. But even though I know I made the right call not to open the door, I still feel a pang of guilt for not letting him in. It's a complicated kind of guilt, one that comes with knowing you did what you had to, but wishing the situation had been different. Here's a little backstory before I dive in. My wife and I don't live together anymore. Things had become strained. Worse than strained, really. She'd become abusive, especially toward our daughter. And if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that my daughter, just shy of 18 months old, is my entire world. I'm currently unemployed, but my mom has been a huge help, stepping in wherever she can. Today started like any other. Around 4 p.m., my daughter woke up from her nap, so I decided to take her to the store. It's our little routine. She's a ball of energy, always moving, always curious, and sitting still for more than 10 minutes is just not her style. Usually I let her walk beside me, holding her tiny hand, matching her pace, no matter how slow it might be. We were out of a few essentials: flour, sugar, noodles. And as we wandered through the aisles, I remembered we were running low on milk, so I grabbed a gallon. With my hands full of groceries, I couldn't hold her hand like I usually do, so I walked right behind her, urging her forward. Of course, that didn't mean she was in a hurry. Every few steps, she'd stop to investigate something. Maybe a colorful box on a lower shelf or some bright packaging in the sale section. Patience. I kept my voice calm and steady, even as frustration started creeping in. I couldn't blame her. She's a toddler, curious about everything, but I silently wished I'd grabbed a basket instead of trying to juggle everything in my arms. By the time we reached the registers, we were both ready to be done. Register 1, conveniently located near the customer service desk, was open. I set everything down to be rung up, but the attendant was busy handling a return. That meant waiting. Again. The layout of the store was pretty standard. To my right was the entrance, where people streamed in. The exit, however, was behind the service desk, leading through a small foyer and out to the parking lot. As customers entered, they passed by the customer service desk, which gave my daughter a prime opportunity to do what she loved most: wave and say hi. And boy, did she take advantage of it. While we waited, I tried to keep her entertained with a few rounds of patty cake and the itsy bitsy spider. But her main source of joy, greeting every single person who walked by. "Hi," she chirped in her squeaky toddler voice, her little hand waving enthusiastically. Some people smiled and waved back, their expressions softening at her charm. Others stopped for a moment, cooing and telling her how adorable she was. It was a sweet moment, a little brightness in an otherwise mundane errand. But I had no idea that this trip to the store was about to take a very dark turn. By now, I was used to people stopping to adore my daughter. It always made me smile, knowing she wasn't one of those cranky, screaming kids you sometimes see in stores. She was friendly, sweet, and full of life. The cashier was finally ready to ring us up, so I knelt and told my daughter to hold my hand. With my hands full and needing to pull out my wallet, I let her hand go for just a moment, keeping my eyes on her as I retrieved my debit card. The cashier handed me my receipt, and that's when everything unraveled. "What are you doing with his daughter?" the cashier bellowed, her voice cutting through the din of the store. I whipped around to see a man, a stranger, holding my daughter. My heart stopped as I registered what was happening. He had picked her up and was making a break for the entrance doors, carrying her like she was nothing. For a moment, I froze. Shock coursed through me, locking my body in place. But when I saw the doors refuse to open, they were one-way doors, thank God, the spell broke. The cashier was already shouting into the phone, telling the police what was happening. I didn't think, I just acted. I always carry a pocket knife with me, mostly to break the seals on my daughter's juice. My hand instinctively went to it, but I hesitated. I didn't want to risk getting in trouble, not while my daughter's safety was on the line. Instead, I ran. The man had turned, looking for another escape route, just as someone started coming through the entrance doors. I seized the moment, slamming my fist into his temple. He stumbled, disoriented, and I snatched my daughter from his arms. Her tiny frame clung to me as I held her tight. the fear and relief crashing over me in waves. The man didn't stick around. He bolted through the doors, empty-handed, disappearing into the night. The police arrived within minutes. They immediately took my statement, though there wasn't much I could tell them. The man's face had been obscured by shaggy hair, a beard, and a hoodie. Nothing distinctive. Witnesses, including the cashiers, gave their accounts, and officers began scouring the area. Someone mentioned seeing the man run behind the building, but he was already long gone. After ensuring we were safe, the officers offered to take us home. Once there, they asked more questions. Had I seen the man before? Did I know anyone who looked like him? Then they delved into our home life. CPS had been by earlier that day to discuss my wife's mental health plan, and the police had already been at our home before. It felt like an endless parade of questions, but I answered every single one. Before leaving, the officers handed me their cards, telling me to call if I saw anything suspicious. I thanked them and shut the door, feeling the day's weight pressing down on me. But then, about 20 minutes later, there was a knock. I opened the door to find the officers standing there again. This time, not empty-handed. They brought a giant box of Pampers diapers, a massive pack of wipes, 6 oversized Winco bags of groceries, and a couple of bags filled with toys. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. When they handed me a Christmas card, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I fell to my knees, tears spilling down my face. I spent several minutes choking back sobs as I thanked them over and over, my words barely coherent. After they left, I opened the card. Inside, it read, "You're a strong father. You've been through so much, and your daughter is lucky to have someone like you." Tucked inside was $100, wrapped in a note that said, "Get a drink or two if you need it." I don't drink, but I'll be using that money to get extra Christmas presents for my mom and daughter. That night, as I watched my daughter play with her new toys, safe and sound, I felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. Fear and gratitude, exhaustion and hope. Life had thrown so much at us, but in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. We weren't facing it alone.